So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. I'm delighted to say today that I am joined by Lord Mark Price. So, over to the interview. Welcome. This is what I call the Rare Business Podcast. It's the name of it because it's about talking to people that are doing things that are quite rare in the world. That's the general idea of it. But with me today, I have Lord Mark Price, no less. How do you do? And welcome. But for the benefit of our listeners and readers, because this is going to go out in sort of two forums and things, Mark, Can I ask you to sort of introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you, your background, the work that you kind of do, that you've done? Is just a bit of context?
Yeah, no, happy to do that, and really lovely to speak with you. So I come from Crewe. My dad owned his own small business. He owned a corner shop, which he sold before I was born, and then he had a wholesale business. So he bought and sold crisps and confectionery in business from the big manufacturers and sold them to smaller businesses. So from as young as I can remember, I was sort of at work with him, meeting people. He was a preacher as well, so he'd preach on a Sunday, and he taught me some really important lessons which have stayed with me throughout my whole life. Everybody's equal in the eyes of God. Nobody's better than anybody else. We all have different skills and abilities. People have a point of view that's based on the experiences they have. They're not right and they're not wrong. They're just different to your own. It's important for you to understand them and build on them. Believing that business is all about the long term, not about the short term, that if you get a new customer, you look after them, and that there's no profit in prejudice, that you should never take a prejudice view of everything.
I really like that.
So those kind of values stuck with me. I spent 34 years in the John Lewis Partnership. I joined as a graduate trainee. I read archaeology and ancient history at university, went into retail because my kind of dad had been in that area, only applied for 3 jobs, was offered 2 of them, M&S and John Lewis. Joined John Lewis because it had 5 ocean-going yachts and 2 golf courses. I was a mad keen golfer. The perks. I was a mad keen golfer. My girlfriend at the time lived in Southampton, so I started at John Lewis in Southampton. And then I was, 17 years in John Lewis. Worked my way through, was managing director of a couple of their department stores. Then I was asked to go to Waitrose, joined the board as marketing director, selling director, then became managing director of Waitrose via a brief stint as strategy and IT director for the partnership on the main board. So I was on the main board for, 12, 13 years. And then I was deputy chairman of the John Lewis Partnership, as well as being MD of Waitrose, running Waitrose. I was deputy chairman of Channel 4 TV, which I did for 3 years, and I was on the board of Channel 4, and I ran 2 charities for the Prince of Wales, Business in the Community, which is a huge business charity, and also I set up for him the Prince's Countryside Fund. And then I was due to retire in 2016 from the partnership. I was 55, was going to start writing and doing some of the things that had given me great pleasure for many years, but I couldn't really devote the time to. And then David Cameron asked me to join the government as Minister for Trade and Investment. I agreed to do that. He asked me to do it for 2 years. After just 4 months, we had the referendum. He went, Theresa May came in. She asked me to take on the job of Minister of State for Trade Policy. So I spent the next year travelling around the world trying to persuade people to keep their trade deals with us post-Brexit. And then in September I stepped down, and now I'm doing what I always said I was going to do. I write every morning, and I'm building a digital capability to help people enjoy their time at work. It's about measuring workplace happiness and people finding the right jobs and loving those jobs and helping people with career advice. So I've built this site called engaging.works. So I'm building that and getting people to use it and get more from their working life, and I'm writing both my business and children's books. And
Blimey.
Also sitting in the House of Lords, which I love doing.
Blimey. So the reason why I reached out to you, and the reason why we started talking about having a conversation, is that one of the first products was a book that came out recently, which is called Fairness for All: Unlocking the Power of Employee Engagement. I really like it, and I was really interested in it because one of the things that fascinates me is a lot of people talk about the John Lewis Partnership. A lot of people talk about Waitrose and their model and everything, and they're quite open with the way that they talk about kind of things. But there's not very many books that have almost like looked under the hood of this is how we do it, this is the history behind it, and pulled it all sort of together. So this is one of the first ones I've really kind of come across, and I want to say thank you for this, because I'm like, God, blimey, it's like the secrets.
You're welcome.
So, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about the book, and does it feel like you wrote it because it's almost a bit like a personal kind of biography of what you've learned along the way, or is there another reason behind kind of the book?
So I published another book called Workplace Fables, which came out in September of last year, and that is more of stories throughout my time in business. Okay. So what I've done is I've taken a story, I've fableized it, if there is such a word, and then I've put a moral at the end. So those are all the lessons that I learned from my time in business. Fairness for All was different, and the genesis of the book was going to the Occupy protest in 2011, and I was intrigued as to why people would go and camp outside St Paul's on the pavement over the winter months. And what was extraordinary about it, and really struck me, is that the church didn't want to move the people on. Mm-hmm. The police said they wouldn't move the people on because it was the church's decision, because it was the church's land. And therefore it sort of rumbled on and on and on. And when I went there, I met, I hate to use the word ordinary people, but you know what I mean by just normal people who'd gone there. They weren't anarchists. They were just there to say the system is not working for us. And there were a whole host of concerns they expressed about getting their kids into the right school, about hospitals working the way they wanted them to. Not in a racist way, but saying migration is having a real impact on us. It's pushing down our wages, it's putting our public services under pressure, and we're concerned about that. There was a lot around technology. We're losing our jobs to technology. There was a lot about the sort of austerity budgets and the fact that they felt they were working harder and going backwards, so that their lives were more difficult. They felt their lives were more uncertain. So having visited 3 times, I thought that I'd write Fairness for All, to capture that sentiment, which is not uniquely British. Over all of the Western democratised countries, I've seen exactly the same thing as I travelled them as Trade Minister. And you see it with the Trump election, you see it with Macron in France. There are all kinds of examples now around the world where people are saying we just don't kind of like where we've got to. And so my book really was about trying to explain how under a similar set of circumstances in the 1920s, Speed and Lewis came to the idea that there needed to be a different model of capitalism. And he decided that the John Lewis business, which didn't include Waitrose in the 1920s, should be put into trust for the benefit of all the people that work there. So it's really the story about today's circumstances, why in some way they mirror what happened when Speed and Lewis did what he did, and then to try and explain in principle his view of the world, which was very simple, which is if you put your people first, your people stay longer and are more committed. They're more loyal. Because of that, your customers get better service. Because of that, you have a profitable and sustainable business. And what's remarkable now is all the academic evidence is saying, well, actually, that's right. You know, people with the most engaged and happy workforces have the best customer service and are the most profitable.
It just makes me think of the service profit chain that came out about 30 odd years ago. Quite. And people thought it was quite revelatory at the time. You're like going, really?
Well, but you're quite right. I mean, a Harvard paper. But so I suppose the thing that surprised me today is that people still don't get that. And so the book was to set out why in principle this is a good thing. And then what I did is say, look, within the John Lewis Partnership, but also other organisations that I've come across, these are the 6 things that lead to people being more engaged in their workplace. It's about reward and recognition, feeling that you're fairly rewarded, and that you are getting something back for your labour and the value that you're adding to a business. It's about feeling recognised for doing something really well. And in all the research, recognition comes out as being more important, funny enough, than reward. Reward only ever minimises discontent, whereas recognition maximises content. Mm-hmm. So being told that you're doing a good job, being rewarded then for that is important. The second thing, and the most important according to Speed and Lewis, and I probably agree with him, is the provision of information, sharing information. Far too many people in their workplaces feel that they are not being given fair and honest information by the management about what's going on. And so Speedon felt that unless you had the information about how your business was performing, what the sales were, what the profits were, what decisions you were making about investment, then you couldn't do the third thing, which is empowering people, saying to people, look, you make the decision, I'm giving you the power to decide on how to serve this customer, but what we want is to retain this customer for the long term.
Sure.
It was also quite insightful that the John Lewis Partnership had written into its constitution, until I became the first marketing director in 1997, that thou shalt not do marketing, and that word of mouth is the best way to communicate. So rather than advertise to get new customers, it was all about looking after the customers that you've got.
Sure.
So people could come in with an outrageous complaint, and rather than say, go away, you'd say, very good, we'll refund you. And you gave the individuals the power to do that. The fourth thing was about well-being. And that was feeling that the people that you work for really care about your well-being, and it was mental, it was physical, and it was financial. So committees were set up to help people who fell on difficult times financially, to give them interest-free loans, all anonymously. GPs, chiropodists and others were employed within the shops to keep people on their feet and working. The fifth area was a sense that you do something worthwhile. So there was a bigger purpose in the John Lewis Partnership, and it was this new form of industrial democracy, that what was being created was something that was better, that everybody could participate in. And that's morphed over recent times into things which are, more current, like community matters in Waitrose, or allowing people to volunteer. But
Sure.
It's making people feel that what they're doing has a benefit and a point. And lastly, it was about workplace satisfaction, which really falls into two areas. One is about the relationship that you have with your line manager, which is critical. People leave managers, they do not leave businesses. 83% of people who leave say they left because of their manager, not because they thought that Google was somehow a bad company overnight.
It's the biggest Achilles heel in kind of the way I think the way that organisations think about training and developing their people is how middle management, or this, anything from team leaders to supervisors to kind of middle management, don't get that sort of support. You end up with a skills-based frontline sort of training, and then you get the high flyers sort of like leadership sort of talent sort of stuff, and then there's the sandwich, the filler as it were, is the most important kind of bit, but doesn't get the attention it deserves, and it makes me kind of really frustrated.
I agree. And the other thing that makes it more difficult, to your point, is that pretty well everywhere now it's that layer that's been stripped out. So you either get senior management, or you get very young junior management who haven't been trained and developed. They've been crammed into jobs at a very early age. So when I came through the system, there's no way you'd be given senior management responsibility in your 20s, and yet now that's not uncommon, because there is no middle layer to progress through and to learn. So I think that respect that people have for their line manager is critical in workplace happiness. And then the very last one, which again is a big deal for people, is feeling as though their careers are being developed. And what my research shows from the Engaging Works website is that the older you get, the less you feel you're being developed by your company. So when you're young, you feel as though there's lots of training and development. If you're a high flyer, you feel there's lots. But then you tend to, what my research is saying is that when you get into your 40s, you feel as though the company have kind of forgotten you. You know as much, and you've got to, sort of find your own way. So this sense of feeling happy because you're continually being developed is very important to people.
You don't think there's an interesting kind of dynamic within that which I find interesting when people talk about engagement, but actually there's engagement is like a two-sided coin, is that sort of a company or business or organisation has a responsibility to think about its workforce and how it engages them, but the individual has also a responsibility to think about how they're engaging with the work and the people around them as well. And surely that has to include your own learning and development. So because learning and development and training and things isn't just a one-way street, it should be actually, if you are ambitious or you're interested or curious or want to keep kind of improving, then it's incumbent on the individual as well to take responsibility for their own learning and development, as well as just waiting for opportunities to occur. And going back to the sort of the middle management sort of element, I would maybe that we can incite a revolution in kind of in middle management. We can say we should all rise up and demand more attention. But if you did it collectively, then it would be noticed. I mean, even though that has been stripped out, a lot of the people have been stripped out. We're still talking about a large body of people.
Yeah. No, well, I agree with you.
Yeah.
And it is about rights and responsibilities. In the partnership talks a lot about rights and responsibilities of the individual within the organisation. There are rights that you get in terms of access to bonus and pensions and all sorts of wonderful things, but then you have a responsibility to make the business better.
I think one of the fascinating things about, I think one of the things you said, I just thought, I wrote it down when it was written into the Constitution, and you changed it, but when Spedding Lewis could have said, "Thou shalt not do any marketing." I'm thinking, wow, so it's like incredible sort of idea. I mean, it's a beautiful concept. I mean, why would you not want to build a business that didn't need to go out and find new customers because your customers would do that for you? It's kind of an ideal scenario. But I guess as the world develops and competition kind of goes up, you've got to keep striving and fighting things. But
you're right. So the partnership came to the conclusion in the late 90s that it was just being shouted out.
Yes.
That its voice wasn't being heard, that you could give customers great service, but if all your competitors were saying, I don't know, we sell the best meat, and you weren't out there saying we sell the best meat, ultimately people lost that confidence. So the partnership decided that it had to start spending some money on getting its messages out there.
Yeah. And is that the only sort of changes that the partnership has gone through in the year? Because, I mean, or is Spedding Lewis been so prescient that actually most of that stuff is stuck over the course of the kind of years?
The core of it has stuck. There have been changes in the way that things have been done. So in terms of the democracy, it used to be one branch, one person in terms of the central committees. And then the partnership just got so big that there were 400 or 500 people in a room, and it became unworkable. So, that system changed and it became regional and then central. So there have been practical changes to deal with size, but the principles have never changed really. I think that probably the thing it's wrestling with most at the moment, and very openly, I and some others had different views in the partnership. I think that the partnership model works best when it is significantly decentralised.
Right.
I think that you have to say to an individual, we trust you to make decisions. But if you look at it from a cost efficiency point of view, you'll always say, well, if we centralise, we could do things, better.
Well, that's the assumption.
That's the assumption. So I fought in all my time there never to centralise. So I refused to have a central call centre for Waitrose. If a customer had a complaint, they went through to the branch that had sold them the product that they weren't happy with, because I felt it was important that branch was accountable for that service to that customer and that product. I think when you get branches saying, "Oh, phone our customer service centre," it's nothing to do with us, then you lose that feeling of responsibility and accountability, which I think are important for people's reward and for people feeling that they're achieving something. So I think that that's probably the thing of greatest substance around the model, which is arguably changing, a drive for centralisation on the back of efficiency against accepting a degree of inefficiency to keep people at the centre of decision making.
Yeah, well, it's just fascinating because I didn't know that's the approach that's been taken. It's very decentralised, and actually if anybody's got calls, it gets pushed down into the store. But how does that work, say, for online sort of shoppers of Waitrose? Is it the same kind of like?
Well, yeah, it is the same. I mean, the shops deliver, so they're responsible.
Right.
The website obviously is designed centrally. Products are bought centrally. So there are some things that are done centrally, but wherever an individual has an interface with somebody else, you just try to give them as much freedom as they can to use their judgment. There are rules, there are frameworks, but you allow people to break the rule for the sake of common sense, for the sake of keeping a customer or doing something more efficiently.
Yeah, because I think I've always found it fascinating why more companies don't do it that way, because you end up with retaining this kind of visceral understanding of how things kind of like work and a customer's concerns and where they've kind of, and the ability just almost to connect all the dots. And I'm particularly interested in the idea that more companies haven't really adopted that sort of approach, particularly that a lot of technology and systems can facilitate that much more these days, in that people can have access to systems and data and knowledge bases and things to be able to do that. Yeah, no, so it's fascinating. So it's really interesting to hear that.
The thing that I rail against is companies setting rules on these things. I hate it if I go into a shop and the assistant will say to me, I'm afraid we've only got freedom to make a refund up to the value of £10. I think, well, how stupid is that? Or, there'll be a board behind them and they'll say, our refunds policy, and they'll just turn around and point at the board. And you just think, use your bloody judgment. What's it going to cost a company if you satisfy a customer? It costs you 50 quid. And often I think that it would be really helpful in some of these companies if they publish what their marketing budget is to attract a new customer. And they said to attract a new customer costs us in marketing online £1,000. They wouldn't think twice then about a customer who comes in with a faulty gut saying here's 50 quid, we want to keep you a customer. But sure. The mentality, I think, is often the wrong way around. It's about compliance, corporately driven, who's setting the rules. And you get people who are promoted and go and sit in the head office and they think, what am I going to do today? I'm going to come up with a new set of rules. And then what am I going to do? I'm going to make sure people apply them and enforce them. And so it strips away people's judgment. And that's why people start being unhappy in their jobs, because they think, well, what freedom do I have to exercise my judgment? What freedom do I have to demonstrate that I can make a real difference to this organisation?
But do you also not think that there's a lot of companies that sort of intellectually understand that, and then they start talking about empowerment, or we're empowering our people, but then you shift from one way of doing things to another, kind of this new way of doing things, and there'll be people that are say working in stores or on the front line or whatever, and they go, we have no idea what that means. What does it mean, exercising kind of judgment? And almost a bit like there's an assumption that if you move from one state to another state, that people automatically get and understand and are comfortable with that, and then actually sometimes you almost have to put training wheels on a new system to enable it to happen. So it's not just about a mindset shift or a policy shift. Actually, you've got to work towards that, and I think that comes from management and culture and leadership and support for people. Would you agree with that or not?
Yeah, broadly I'd agree with that. I remember Sainsbury's. I knew quite a lot of people in Sainsbury's in the past, and they said that when John Sainsbury's ran the business, if a fly landed on a ham in their shop in, I don't know, Birmingham, he'd know about it. And there's a difference between having high standards and discipline and allowing people freedom to operate. And you just have to be very clear about what you're talking about. If you're running a food business, you need to do certain things in terms of health and safety, in terms of regulation. If you don't do them and you're not compliant, you can be fined and you can kill a customer through food poisoning. They are non-negotiable. Sure. Those things have to be done every day. There is a process, something has to be ticked, the manager has to make sure it's done. Where you have the freedoms is when a customer comes back and says, I didn't think that was very good. When a customer says, can you help me with this? When a customer says, I'm thinking of cooking X tonight, what would you do? Sure. So I used to say to managers, look, there's a huge scope for you to influence the day-to-day running of your business, the people that you employ, how you employ them, etc. There are other things that you can't mess about with. One of the things that quite often came up in the context of Waitrose was the layout of the shop. But the layout of the shop is negotiated by the buyer and the supplier and done on the basis of a whole host of things I won't bore you with. It's non-negotiable. And yet when I went back to run Waitrose, having left it for a few years to do the corporate role, I found, sorry, I'm driving you mad with that, Adrian. I found that managers had decided to take on themselves the freedom to move products around the shop. So I think you've just got to be really clear, and then you've got to explain you can't do that because the buyer has negotiated X, Y, Z with this supplier that he'll have that number of facings on that shelf level for this amount of time, and if you don't do it, then the supplier is not going to be very happy with us. So I think if you are not clear to your point about the areas where you will allow freedom and the areas where you won't, you get yourselves in a real muddle. And Sainsbury's did that post John Sainsbury.
Right. Yeah, so it's like it wasn't broke, but they decided to fix it.
Yeah, well, he went into kind of liberal, you can all run your shops, so you want to run your shops, and it lost that discipline of routine that some things need.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. No. It's, the thing is, it's not boring, because I remember because I think. I've spoken to a number of different people over the course of the last kind of few years about sort of this type of approach, and the one that I really like, because it just stands out for me, it's so simple to the point. There was a guy called I think it's Will Beckett, runs the Hawksmoor restaurants, great steak restaurants, and he said we have one rule, and that is. It says work hard and be nice to people. That's our rule, and then we have all these standards that we aspire to that work across the business, whether you're front of house, your bar, you're kind of like in the kitchen, whatever. These are our standards that we must meet, and the things that we do. But he said that's kind of what we all work to, and I just thought that's just so compelling, because everybody can pick that up and run with it, and it's meaningful for pretty much everybody, but it allows them to be who they are. And it becomes it's about valuing that kind of person, and then saying, right, fine, we're enabling you to do the best job that you can do, and here's our framework. The framework's very clear. So yes, the point about Sainsbury's and Waitrose and John Lewis partnership is, I think it's well made, because it is about having those very meaningful, very succinct, very clear parameters and rules of things that you do's and you don'ts, because then people understand kind of how they're operating. They understand the rules, right?
But within so I think that's a brilliant way of articulating it. But within your be nice, I think it's very important that you coach people to understand what that means and what it can be.
Sure.
So one of the examples that I use in my Workplace Fables book on this, well, there are two. I'll tell you two.
Okay.
I'll try and do them really quickly. I was when I was managing director of John Lewis High Wycombe, we had a new manager start in the gift department, and it was just before Christmas. The department was going crazy, and I went over to see how things were, and the baskets by the side of the till were being lobbed in by the cashier. So many customers. And this thing was so high now, it was like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. So I called the manager over, and he had his back to the till. I said, how's it going? He said, oh, fantastically busy. So I said, tell me, what are your standards for the department? What standards do you set for baskets and till points? He said, they have to be neat and tidy. So I said, oh, great. I said, tell me what you mean by neat and tidy. And he said, what with baskets? I said, yeah, baskets. He said, well, they should all go into the basket holder. The handle should all be the same way. Shouldn't be any litter in the bottom of the baskets, bits of paper, old receipts. When they get to a certain height, then they should all be taken out to be distributed around the department. So I said, fantastic. Now I know what you mean by neat and tidy. I said, but do your team know? And I turned him around, and he saw the Tower of Babel, and he said, no, obviously not. So one of the challenges you have when you want to hit really high standards is if you use terms like be nice to people. My understanding of be nice is very different to your understanding.
Yeah, indeed.
And so I find that the really best leaders and managers coach people to experience something that's better.
Sure.
You see it a lot in Japan. I mean, the Japanese are just fantastic at taking the mundane and making it into an art. And so when I was running a department store, when I was running Waitrose, I made it an art for people. I said, look, to aspire to the very highest standards. And by giving them that journey, what the John Lewis Partnership does is it doesn't pay people a flat rate. So if you're a cashier, there's a 30% difference between the starting rate and the top end.
Right.
Because, whether somebody looks you in the eye and says thank you very much, whether they hand your change back into your hand or they put it on the till point, whether they put the receipt in your hand, whether they said to you, did you get everything you wanted today, whether they help you with your packing, those have a huge difference in looking after people, treating them well,
sure,
and just putting people through a till point. If you go to a card department of a lunchtime to buy a birthday card, the service that you need and want is very different from going to a fashion department where you're going to have time and you want somebody to say you made a very good choice. If you buy a washing machine, you have a very different service, and people on the money they know that you're spending a lot, and I won't bore you with the detail, but they'll use techniques to reassure you bought the right thing at the right price. So my contention would probably be that there aren't enough people that really understand that, and that's why service levels are hit and miss, because I think you can say to people, we can train you to be absolutely exceptional at this. It's not hard, but it's making you think differently about what a customer experience is.
Sure.
So you can, I always said I'd rather train nice people than train people to be nice. So I think at the core of it, you do want to train nice people, but I do think people can be taught how to take service levels to a much higher standard.
But then, if I think about it, and you think about what we were talking about before, about that middle management kind of like layer, and then it gets kind of hollowed out, that makes it much more difficult.
Yeah, I agree.
That whole kind of building.
Because they're the people that have got to do the coaching.
Oh no.
And who's coaching them? Because my other slight worry is the people now in the more senior management roles have not had that training themselves.
Right.
And so they're not able to say, and they don't understand why it's going wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And you find that people like Dave Potts, who's just gone to run Morrison's, is an out-and-out trader. He will be, if orange is on at least half full in a crate, they look rubbish and people don't buy them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just that understanding of that intense attention to detail.
Yeah.
You go into the best restaurants and they're agonising on how the wine glass has been placed against the fork and the cup. And it's all about, when you go in, you don't notice, you just think, well, it's neat. But the attention to detail they pay to getting those small things right is what ultimately makes the total service experience better. So underlying that, people have got to be nice, has to be, are we really helping our people understand what great service is all about? And I would agree with your contention that is a middle management job. Unfortunately, it's a shortcut getting rid of that middle management to quick profits. It's a long-term route to decline.
And I also kind of sort of like pull my hair out when people are starting to look for technological fixes and through data and analytics and stuff, or we can manage our workforce kind of better, sort of like by gathering all this data and then monitoring performance and all that sort of stuff. And I'm thinking, you're kind of, it's still the same sort of thing. It's missing, and it's funny. It's actually kind of occurs to me. So I went at this event before Christmas, and Tom Peters was there. If you're familiar with Tom Peters, brilliant guy. Kind of.
You've reminded me of something, so keep talking.
Increasingly intransigent as he gets kind of older, and he turned around and said, "You know what? He said, I'm getting sick of large organisations." He says, because I've been saying the same sort of things, which are very much kind of focus on your people, management by walking about, all of these different sort of things. I mean, because that's where excellence really comes from. He says, but I mean, I'm getting sick of large organisations because I've been saying the same thing for like 35 years and nothing's kind of changing, because actually the way that they're set up economically, most large organisations, is that they're almost predisposed towards reducing kind of headcount as much as kind of possible, and don't spend as much time developing their people or investing in their people as they should. And so he was saying, I'm going to turn around and be an advocate for more of the enlightened organisations, but also smaller businesses who seem to get this, that the human connection and the personal connection is the thing that makes the difference. which I thought was quite a revelation coming from him, given that he's been a darling of Dow 100 and Silicon Valley kind of like firms for the longest
I've
kind of
made
time.
no difference in 30 years.
He was like, be gone with you. I am now kind of going to change my tune. But that's kind of fine. And it was laced with a bunch of profanities, which was quite entertaining. And there was a whole room of people that were sort of within that sort of business management thinking sort of space, professorial stuff, big book writers and stuff. I was there as an observer. I hasten to add. I'd include myself in that audience. And but they were slightly chastened by his remarks.
He was clearly just deciding to be provocative.
Yeah. But
if you ask any, so I was used to say to managers in the partnership when I was there, when you come across a customer who says they've had a wonderful experience with John Lewis and Waitrose, ask them what it is, and I bet you 9 times out of 10 it's a complaint that went right. And what you've been able to do is to say, yeah, I know your telly blew up, but I'll get you a new one within half an hour and we'll bust a gut to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And what customers appreciate is how you put things right, far more than you got a telly, it didn't blow up, they plugged it in, it worked, so what?
Sure.
And trying to design out, it reminds me of a conversation I had with somebody once on this, every fault and every fault, I think in a way lessens the opportunity a brand has to build a really strong relationship with the customer. So I wouldn't advocate that you go about being a crap company and getting everything wrong, but what I would be about is saying when things do go wrong, you use them as the best marketing opportunity you're ever going to have to win a customer for life.
Sure.
And again, that's about empowering an individual to be able to do them.
Yeah, which you see so many organisations when they have complaints departments that are stuck in a cupboard in the back. It tells you everything you need to know about how they deal with that and how they don't understand that actually people know that things go wrong. People just want you to fix them and do a great job of fixing them. And it's a bit like the sort of this dynamic now where people, if they're booking a holiday, they look on review sites and about hotels and different things, and people are slightly suspicious of somebody that's got like 100% reviews, and they're like going, oh, okay. Because they're like, oh no, that looks a bit fake. But if they've got like 90%, it's all 4 and 5 stars, and that's, you're like, okay, fine. But then they'll go, that's the comfort factor, and then they go, okay, we know there's going to be a couple of times it's gone wrong. Let's go check out what happened when it went wrong, because there's that sort of like, what's the worst case? Because then they also look to see how the company's responded, and it's the response becomes that insurance sort of factor. It's like going, if it all goes to hell in the handbasket, are you going to be with me? How are you helping? Because that's, for me, that's the fear of the worst case scenario sort of thing. So it's a reality, but and it's such a huge missed opportunity. So one of the things I wanted to kind of know, because you talked about purpose and things, but then there's also this other big old thing around large organisations and people talking about this increasingly complex and fast-paced, fast-moving sort of environment that we live in, and so people are starting to talk about organisational structures and changing organisational structures and how something which is a bit more functionally based and so on and so forth is not really fit for purpose in this modern environment. Do you agree with that, or is that actually it's a distraction and actually it's more about it's about other things? If you understand what I mean.
I don't know.
Okay, so like for example, we've got big organisations like say like some of the banks, and they're saying that the environment is changing so fast. We now have to move away from being more functionally kind of based to being a bit more cross-functional kind of agile teams, all these type of things. And that seems to be the latest thing. Kind of we've changed the nature of our organisational kind of structure, our organisational form. Now, I can see benefits in doing that, but I actually don't. I also kind of am suspicious that it just is like potentially another thing, and then actually it's almost a papering over the cracks, and there's a bigger issue at hand, and that perhaps it's actually what they're not doing is they're not addressing actually their culture and their leadership and how they can work together, and actually that change in organisational form isn't necessarily going to solve all the problems because there's a bigger kind of problem. And it seems to me, I guess I'm probably going to answer my own question, that actually the John Lewis partnership and Waitrose is actually, you're probably structured you'd evolved decision making down to the store level, and you wrestle with that, how things kind of change and kind of how much needs to get done centrally and how much needs to get done in the store, but your instinct is to try and push things as much as possible down to the store. And actually your leadership and culture is the thing that facilitates that. Would that be accurate summary?
I think if I were you, I'd probably delve more into.
I'm just conscious this is a bit of a waffle, and I might edit this bit out. That's kind of fun.
But I think the thing that's, I think it's what leads to that change.
Right.
Why all of a sudden do people decide the org that they've got today isn't working and they want to change it? I always thought Tesco had a really good philosophy. They said if it isn't better for our customers, our colleagues and our profits, we won't do it.
Sure. And
I think that you have to apply that test. I also think that chief executives now going into a new role are under huge pressure. On average you get 4.5 years. I think that to do something big on organisational change, to improve things because you don't understand the current system and how it works, is is a big comforting thing, and the city like the fact that you're doing something to improve efficiency. I've always tended to prefer an evolutionary approach than a revolutionary approach. I've always thought, well, what we've got is working. How do we make it better? 100 times 1% improvements are better than a 100% improvement. So that's tended to be more my philosophy than to necessarily rip the whole thing up and try and start again.
Well, I think you could probably apply that to the same sort of logic to large transformation and change kind of programs. Many of which don't work because they're too big and they're scary for a lot of people, and people don't necessarily like that massive kind of shock, and therefore the evolution is something that, it's just part of the way that we do things.
But the important thing about evolution, though, is you have to think a long way ahead. So it's incumbent on the new management to say, look, I want the company to look like this in 5 and 6 years' time. How do I evolve that over 5 and 6 years? A lot of people will feel they just don't have the luxury of that time. They'll feel that, departments aren't working well together, therefore the answer is to
get rid of the departments
structure,
slam them all together, sort of thing. Yeah. But actually, I think that's a point. Is that a lot of people talk about siloed behaviour, lack of collaboration, lack of communication, all these different sort of things that manifest themselves as problems. But I'm just thinking, I'm not sure that actually changing your organisational structure is necessarily the solve. The go-to solve for those sort of kind of problems, because actually they're about behaviours rather than actual structure, more than anything else, about people kind of working together. And I don't think structure doesn't always dictate that. That's more about how you go about doing things within the business more than anything else. I guess that's my point.
I think that is right. I think there are some things that structurally change, like e-com or digital become a bigger part of your organisation, and then you have to decide, is it an adjunct, and when does it become mainstream, and if it does, how does it? And so I think there are things about the changing nature of your business that will lead you to a conclusion that says we do business in a different day to day than we did it 10 years ago. Does our structure reflect that? I think that moving the deck chairs for the sake of moving the deck chairs, I've seen as being more counterproductive in the short term. So I've always tried to evolve it. I've never taken my team in anywhere I've gone. I've always waved goodbye to the team I work with, wish them well, and when I go, I adopt the new team and I embrace them, and we work together on how we take things forward. I think that clearing a group out to bring in people who agree with everything you say and are going to implement what you think is, again, understandable in the context of you've got 4 years and you've got to get it changed. It's not good, I think, from an evolutionary point of view.
Perfect. So if I was to say to you, what do you think are the main lessons for sort of entrepreneurs, leaders or executives that are struggling to try and engage their people, drive workplace employee satisfaction, happiness, that sort of stuff, as a way of enabling their people, empowering their people, engaging the people so that it allows them to deliver better service and better experience. I mean, from your experience, what you say would be the big lessons that you've kind of learned? Yeah, from your experience, from the John Lewis experience that people could benefit from.
So I think from my father and from John Lewis that
I think your father's words were legendary.
Yeah, top man. I think that it is about everybody wants to feel that they are making a contribution in the time that they're on this earth in one form or another. Everybody wants to feel that they've done something well, something they've enjoyed. And I think that if managers understood that simple human instinct that we all have to want to make a mark, to make a difference, to do something well, to be recognised for it, then they would get far more out of the workforce than simply directing them to do what they say. And at the heart of that is just thinking about people's happiness. Am I making this person feel happy today? And I don't see happiness as being a soft and woolly thing. I interchange engagement and happiness.
Right.
I really believe that happiness drives engagement. And people often say to me, well, can you prove there's a causal link between happiness and an improved commercial performance? And the simple answer is yes. You know, there's lots of evidence now, starting, as you said, with Harvard 30 years ago, that says if you have happy employees, then they're more engaged, they're more productive, they stay longer, da-di-da-di-da. But if people challenge me and dismiss that, I say, well, what's wrong with just trying to make people happy for the sake of making people happy? You know, if there is no net benefit, but people are either happy at work or unhappy with 35 hours of their life every week going to work, why wouldn't you want to make them happy?
Sure.
And so for me, that notion of trying to make people's time on earth more enjoyable through trying to provide them with a happier working environment, I think in and of itself is a noble thing for managers to want to do. And they should want to do it because they want to make people happier and they want to make society happier. I think that the consequential benefits of doing it are that businesses are more profitable, society is richer as a consequence. So that's my simple message. Why wouldn't you want to make people happier?
It's a choice, completely a choice. And it's obvious, I guess, when you make it, because it's, you know, for me it seems to be that it's really, really easy to spot the people that one made that choice or kind of wired that kind of way. They just sort of like stand out, as it were, and they might not get it right all of the time, but they're kind of striving and their intent is in the right sort of direction. And I just do think they stand out, and I wish more people would make the choice.
Yeah. It's why I built Engaging Works. I mean, I hope you get a chance to go and see the website.
Yeah, no,
but the first thing you see is the happiness survey. So it's a workplace happiness survey. It's free. And then there's, find your perfect job match. I get people to do the Myers-Briggs test. And then coming soon is what sort of work is going to best suit you from the skills and the abilities and the interests that you have. And then how do you manage your career? So to the point you're making earlier about, I think that I say the way I try to get people to think about it is 1 day, 3 years, 24 years. So the 24 years comes from, I used to see the new graduates when they started in Waitrose, and I'd say to them, what do you aspire to do? What do you want to do? And about 3/4 of them would say, we want your job. So I'd say, all right, that's very good. And I said, well, typically a CEO will get 4.5 years in the UK. I said, if you're really, really lucky, some get 2. You might get 9 years. I said, but say 4.5, 5 years. So when do you want your 5 years? And they all think about it, and then they all start saying, oh, in our mid-40s. I said, yeah, that's not a bad call. Mid-40s, could get to 50, then think about blah, blah, blah. So I said, so you're 21 now, what are you going to do for the next 24 years?
Nice.
And what I wanted to show them is that it's a journey, you know. And I said, along that 24 years, some of you are going to say along the way, you know what, I really don't want it. It's too much work, it's too much hassle, it doesn't suit my character. And there's something along that 24 years that you're going to branch off and do, and you're going to get great pleasure from. So it's fine for you now to write down on a piece of paper, in 24 years, I'm going to be X. But what I want you to do now is think about, in getting to your 24 years, what are you going to do in the next 3 years? I want you to write down on a piece of paper, in 2021 now, I want to have done X. I want to have learned to ride a bike. I want to drive a car. I want to climb a mountain. I want to learn how to speak French. You decide what you want to do.
Yeah.
3 years. And then what I want you to do is every day write in a diary for 1 minute. What did you do today that helped you achieve riding a bike, climbing a mountain and learning French? And that will keep you focused on the things that you say that you're going to do over the next 3 years. And I said, I bet you anything, if you do that, you'll achieve all those things before your 3 years, and then you'll say, what do I want to do next? And you'll find that when you do your list, in the early days, they'll all be about work. I want to learn how to use a computer. I want to learn how to code or whatever. I said, I bet you when you're on your third set, they won't be about that. It'll be, you want to discover things about yourself. You want to discover things about life. You want to make those people around you feel happy. It won't be about you. It will be about the impact that you want to have on others in the world. And that's a really good thing. And then you record that down. I said, if you do that religiously, 1, 3, 24, I guarantee you when you get to 24, you'll be a lot happier and richer individual for all that you've achieved.
Blimey. I think I'm going to go home and
That's
do
on
that.
my website.
Yeah, I'm going to go. I'm thinking of
Career development.
I'm thinking about I should do the 1, 3, and 24 myself. Future planning, why not?
But I think the 3 is really, really important. But even now, I mean, I stepped down from the government in September, and so I was 50, done 57 in a month's time.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I'm thinking now, okay, 57. You know, what do I want to be doing when I'm in my late 70s? What do I want to have done with this 24 years of my life that's come post-government? But more importantly, I've said in the next 3 years, what do I want to have done in terms of, you know, helping people be happier at work, in terms of my writing? And that gives me a focus to how I'm spending my time. Otherwise, I just think it's... you just kind of drift, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's great advice. And you know, I think you might have answered it, but you know, I always have this last question that I ask at the end of these interviews. Well, I have 2. One I ask is there anything that we've missed out that you'd like to add? And then, because my last one is, I give people the opportunity to shamelessly plug anything that they want.
I won't shamelessly.
I asked that intentionally because we're British, and shameless plugs being kind of British is not something that's kind of...
my goal for my 24 years is to try and make a difference in terms of getting individuals and businesses to understand that it is a noble thing to think about their happiness at work and their employees' happiness at work. It will make the workplace happier and it will make the workplace more successful. And so for me now, it will be a series of 3-year journeys into how I do that. And my great hope is that I'll look back in 24 years' time and say, you know what, people are now more focused about their work life and getting the most from it and being happier and richer. And doing, like you, something that they love doing.
Well, noble cause. Lord Mark Price, it's been an honour and a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Let's go and visit the house.